What secret buried in a mountain is so dangerous that the government would lie about it for decades? Art Vance was called a fool for asking. When a storm finally ripped the vault open, he and his dog, Shadow, went inside. They found no gold. They found no weapons. They found a child's doll, a photo album, and a heartbreaking truth from 1943. Now, the people who buried that secret are hunting them. The rain came in horizontal sheets, driven by a wind that screamed off the Pacific. From the single window of his cabin, Arthur "Art" Vance watched the forest bend. At 58, Art was a man who looked carved from the same stubborn, damp timber as the trees. His face was a roadmap of deep lines, weathered by decades of Washington rain and a constant internal pressure. Gray stubble covered his jaw, and his eyes, sharp and intelligent, held a permanent look of scrutiny. He lived alone at the edge of Port Kyle, a small, forgotten town on the Olympic Peninsula. The town, in turn, had largely decided to leave him alone. He had been a park ranger once, respected for his near-supernatural knowledge of the backcountry. But that was before the obsession took root. That was before the Kale Vault. He lost his job for it. Misuse of government resources and time, the dismissal letter had stated. All because he believed a local legend, a ghost story about a secret military bunker hidden deep inside Mount Kale. A low whine broke the silence in the cabin. Beside the cold hearth, a large animal rose from a worn blanket. This was Shadow. He was a German shepherd, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, long retired from a career in search and rescue. His coat was not the typical black and tan, but a striking wolf-like mix of silver gray and white, with a muzzle now frosted by age. He was Art's sole companion, the one living creature who did not judge his handler's fixation. Shadow was the anchor that kept Art tethered to the world. The dog moved silently across the floorboards and pushed his head against Art's hand. Art's gaze softened as he scratched the dog's ears. "I know, boy. It's a bad one." The radio had called it a Pineapple Express, a torrent of tropical moisture aimed directly at their coastline. The drumming of the rain on the tin roof became a deafening, continuous roar. Shadow whined again, this time with more urgency. He paced to the door and back, his senses picking up something Art's could not. Then Art felt it. It was not a sound at first, but a vibration that came up through the soles of his boots. It grew into a deep, sickening rumble, a sound that seemed to come from the very bones of the earth. It was not thunder. It was the mountain. Art grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. The cabin lights flickered and died, plunging the room into near darkness. The grinding, tearing sound of the landslide went on for what felt like an eternity, a terrifying groan of shifting rock and timber. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The only sound left was the relentless pounding rain. Art's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew with absolute certainty where the mountain had broken. The landslide had torn open the exact northern slope he had spent the last 20 years mapping, the slope that protected the Kale Vault. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving a bruised violet sky. The air, scoured clean, smelled of shattered pine and wet earth. Art parked his old truck as close as the mud-slicked road would allow. The last half-mile to the slide zone was a treacherous climb over fallen giants and slick, unstable rock. Shadow moved ahead, his paws sure and silent, a gray ghost against the raw, new scar on the mountainside. When Art finally reached the clearing, he froze. The landscape he had known his entire life was gone. Where a gentle, forested slope had been, there was now a massive concave wound of raw earth and splintered trees. And protruding from the center, like the bone of some long-dead beast, was a slab of gray concrete. It was exactly as the legends claimed. He moved toward it, his breath catching. Beside it, a large metal ventilation shaft, thick with rust, was bent and twisted, its opening exposed by the slide. Art ran a trembling hand over the cold, pockmarked concrete. He was so focused on the structure that he didn't immediately notice Shadow's behavior. The dog was not exploring the main wreckage. Instead, he was 20 feet away, near the base of the ventilation shaft, standing rigid. A low, insistent whine came from the dog's throat. "What is it, boy?" Art murmured, walking over. Shadow ignored him. He jammed his nose into a small, dark cleft in the rock wall, right next to the vent's foundation. It looked like just another crack, but the storm had split open a seam of old, crumbling mortar. Shadow began to dig, not with the playful energy of a pet, but with the focused, frantic intensity of a rescue dog who had found a scent. Dirt and small stones flew from between his paws. "Easy, Shadow. What have you got?" Art knelt beside him, prying away a larger, loose rock. Behind the rock was a dark recess, barely large enough for a man's arm. Art shone his flashlight inside and saw the dull green-brown of metal. It was an old military ammunition box. His heart hammered. He wedged his fingers around it and pulled. It was heavy, but the rusted hinges gave way. He set the box on the damp ground and slowly lifted the lid. The sound of metal grinding on metal was loud in the silence. Inside, there was no ammunition. There was only a tightly wrapped parcel of heavy, dark oilcloth. His fingers fumbled with the stiff, waxy fabric. He unfolded the last layer and stared. There lay a small, leather-bound journal, its cover stamped with a faded military insignia. Beside it, a set of tarnished dog tags rested on a folded piece of paper. A map. He picked up the tags. The name, stamped into the metal, was clear. Vance Silas, his grandfather. Art looked at Shadow, who sat panting quietly, his gray muzzle covered in mud. "You found it, boy?" Art whispered, his voice thick. "You found it." Art spent 2 days in his cabin, hunched over the leather journal. Shadow, sensing his handler's agitation, lay pressed against his legs, offering a silent, warm weight. The journal was not what Art had expected. It was not a personal diary, but a meticulous, cryptic ledger. The pages were filled with military coordinates, dates, and 2 phrases that appeared over and over: Operation Heron and Harmony Shipment. It meant nothing to him. The man who had spent a lifetime learning the secrets of the mountain was now illiterate in its most important language. He was the town fool, but the concrete was real, and the journal was real. He couldn't do this alone. He put the journal in his pack, clipped the leash onto Shadow's collar, and drove to the Port Cale Historical Museum. The museum was a small brick building that always smelled of dust and old wood. Behind the front desk sat a young woman Art had not seen before. "Dr. Ramirez?" Art asked, his voice rough from disuse. The woman looked up. She was Dr. Elena Ramirez, a woman in her late 20s with sharp, intelligent eyes behind dark-framed glasses and dark hair pulled into a practical bun. She was new, a recent transplant from a big university, and she looked at Art with a polite, professional curiosity. Shadow sat perfectly at Art's heel. "I am. Can I help you?" Art fumbled, pulling the oilcloth-wrapped journal from his pack. "My name is Art Vance. I found this up on the mountain, after the slide." Elena's polite expression tightened. She had clearly been warned about the local eccentrics. "Mr. Vance, we get a lot of—" "It's my grandfather's," Art interrupted, pushing it onto the counter. "Silas Vance, he served in the 1940s. The name and the military insignia on the cover made her pause. She carefully opened the fragile book. Her eyes scanned the entries, her skepticism visibly melting into something else. Confusion, then a sudden, sharp focus. She stopped at one of the Harmony Shipment entries. "Where did you say you found this?" she asked, her voice now quiet and intense. "Up on Cale, near the old concrete." "Mr. Vance," she cut him off, "my specialty, my doctoral thesis, was on the mass internment of Japanese Americans in Washington during World War II. Harmony, that was the code name for the Puyallup Assembly Center. Camp Harmony. These codes, they match fragments I've seen in classified documents about the assets, the property that was lost when the families were taken." The air left Art's lungs. This was not a military stash, this was something else. "We need to go to the county archives," Elena said, grabbing her coat. "Now, I need to cross-reference these map coordinates with old property ledgers." The county archive office was dim and quiet. An hour later, they were bent over a massive, yellowed map from 1943 when a shadow fell over them. A man in a perfectly tailored dark suit, looking sterile and out of place among the dusty files, stood beside their table. He was pale, with thin lips and cold, empty eyes. "Mr. Arthur Vance," the man said. It was not a question. Shadow, from under the table, let out a single, low growl, and the hair on his neck stood up. "And Dr. Ramirez, how ambitious." "Who are you?" Elena asked, her hand instinctively closing the journal. "My name is Markfield. I'm with the Department of Defense," he said, flashing a badge so quickly it was just a blur of gold. He focused on Art. "Your numerous Freedom of Information Act requests concerning this region have been noted over the years. Your curiosity is becoming a problem for national security." He then turned his cold gaze to Elena. "And you, Doctor, your career is just beginning. It would be a shame if it were compromised by association with sensitive government property." He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten violence. He simply stated facts. Markfield smiled, a thin reptilian gesture. "Leave this alone, both of you." He turned and walked away, his polished shoes making no sound on the tiled floor. The drive back from the county archive was silent. Markfield's threat, delivered with the cold sterility of a surgeon, hung in the cab of Art's truck. Shadow, in the passenger seat, seemed to sense the shift, his head resting on Art's knee, offering a silent pressure. Elena finally broke the quiet, her voice tight. "He was DOD. He was real. This isn't a theory, Art. It's a cover-up." "I know," Art said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The official visit had terrified him, but it had also extinguished the last embers of his self-doubt. The town fool was right. "They're not protecting a secret," he said, his voice a low growl. "They're hiding a crime." The threat, intended to make them stop, only made them more determined. Back at the museum, Elena stared at a line in Silas's journal. "Heron shipment. Tanaka. 3 cranes. Winter." "I know this," she whispered, her eyes wide. "The Tanaka collection, it's famous. A set of priceless pre-war scroll paintings. They disappeared when the family was sent to Puyallup." 2 days later, they were in Seattle, driving to a modest retirement community. They found Mr. Kenji Tanaka in a small apartment filled with sunlight and orchids. He was a frail man in his late 80s, with a gentle face and eyes that held a lifetime of quiet sorrow. Art, feeling awkward and intrusive, had Shadow sitting at a perfect heel. When Mr. Tanaka saw the dog, his face softened. "He is beautiful," Mr. Tanaka said, his voice thin as paper. "A German shepherd." "He's a retired SR dog, sir," Art said. "He's very calm." "May I?" the old man asked. Art nodded. Shadow, seemingly understanding the fragility of the man, walked over and lay his head gently on Mr. Tanaka's knee. The man's trembling hand began to stroke the dog's gray fur. Elena carefully explained why they were there, showing him the facsimile of the journal entry. When he read his own family's name, Mr. Tanaka closed his eyes. "I was 7, he said, his hand never stopping its movement on Shadow's head. "I remember my father begging the soldiers. The 3 cranes were his father's and his father's before that. The soldier told him they were contraband and would be held for safekeeping." He looked at Elena. "We lost our home, our business, our dignity. But my father, I think he died of a broken heart for those scrolls. They were our soul." He looked down at the dog. "Having him here, it makes it easier to breathe. He feels safe." On the long drive back to Port Cale, Art was silent. The memory of the old man's hand on Shadow's head was burned into his mind. "We have to get in," Art said. "That ventilation shaft is a straight 30-foot drop. We can't climb it. We need help." "Who, Art? Who can we trust?" "An old friend." That night, Art walked into the only bar in Port Cale and found Gus. While Art was tall and lean, Gus was built like a shipping container. Stocky, solid, with a booming voice and a wild red beard. He ran Cale Cliffside Rescue, and what he didn't know about ropes, harnesses, and structural integrity wasn't worth knowing. "Art Vance," Gus boomed, lowering his drink. "To what do I owe the honor? Need a kitten rescued from a tree?" "I need a technical expert, Gus," Art said, sitting down. "Off the books." Gus's smile faded. That sounds like Ranger Art, the one who gets into trouble. It's the Kale Vault, Gus, it's real, and I need to get inside. Gus stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. You saved my neck on Mount Rainier in 1999. My team was lost, and your dog found us. You don't get to cash in that chip for a kitten, Art. You cash it in for this. Tell me what you need. The fog was thick at 4 a.m., clinging to the mountainside like a shroud. It was the cover they needed. Gus's truck, loaded with ropes and climbing gear, idled quietly on the dirt track. Right, Gus said, all business. This is not exploration. This is a technical entry and retrieval. We follow safety protocols. No one takes risks. Art, you and Shadow are first. Elena, you're last. He was in his element, a commander on a vertical battlefield. They wore helmets, harnesses, and headlamps. Gus even had a portable gas meter. Old air is bad air, he stated. Gus anchored a complex system of ropes and pulleys to the base of a massive, healthy cedar. He worked quickly, his thick fingers deft and sure. He rappelled down the 30-foot ventilation shaft first, testing the air and securing the base. It's clear, his voice echoed up. A bit musty, but the air is circulating. Send 'em down. Art clipped Shadow into a specialized canine harness. The dog, a veteran of countless high-angle SR operations, was perfectly calm. Art attached his own harness to the line, and Gus lowered them together. They descended from the gray morning light into absolute, cold darkness. The metal shaft was slick with damp. They landed softly on a concrete floor at the start of a long corridor. Elena followed, her face pale but determined. Okay, Gus whispered, unhooking them. Headlamps on, low beam. The weak circles of light cut through the oppressive dark. The air smelled of concrete, dust, and time. They moved forward, their boots echoing in the confined space. Suddenly, Shadow stopped dead. A low, threatening rumble vibrated in his chest, and he pressed his body hard against Art's legs, refusing to let him take another step. What is it, boy? Art whispered. Gus clicked on his high-powered headlamp, aiming the beam at the floor just ahead. Hold, he commanded. The beam illuminated a large, rusted metal grate. It had almost completely corroded, leaving a gaping black hole over a much deeper sublevel. Good boy, Shadow, Gus breathed, his voice tight. You just saved us a broken neck. They carefully navigated around the hazard and continued to the end of the hall, which opened into a massive, cavernous space. My God, Elena whispered, her voice breaking. It was not a vault of gold. It was a library of lost lives. The huge, climate-controlled chamber was lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves. They were not filled with weapons, but with hundreds of wooden crates, filing cabinets, and tagged bundles. Elena walked as if in a trance to a nearby shelf. A tag, written in Silas Vance's neat military hand, hung from a crate. Tanaka. 3 cranes. Winter. Gus used a small pry bar to gently open the crate. Inside, protected by padding, was a set of exquisite silk scroll paintings. Art moved deeper into the room. He saw stacks of photo albums, children's toys, and boxes filled with fine jewelry. He saw furniture draped in canvas and instruments in their cases. It was a collection of personal treasures, a snapshot of 1,000 lives interrupted, and on every single item, a tag, a name, a family, a ghost. This was his grandfather's secret. Not treason, but a desperate, failed attempt at preservation. He documented everything, Elena whispered, her voice echoing in the vast cold chamber. She was moving methodically, her digital camera flashing as she photographed Silas's ledgers and the neatly labeled crates. The names, the dates, it's all here. It's definitive proof. Art stood frozen, staring at a small wooden crate tagged Kimura. Dolls, 1943. He felt the crushing weight of his grandfather's secret. Gus, ever the professional, was scanning their exit point. Don't get comfortable, he warned, his voice low. This is a retrieval, not a tour. 5 more minutes. His words were cut short by a sound from above. It was a sharp, metallic scrape that echoed down the ventilation shaft. Shadow, who had been quietly observing, instantly rose from his sit. The fur on his neck bristled, and a low, guttural growl started deep in his chest. "They're here," Art said, his blood turning to ice. A rope snaked down from the shaft, followed by another. Two men in dark uniforms, unadorned and functional, rappelled down, landing in perfect, silent unison. They fanned out, their hands resting near their hips. Last, Markfield descended, stepping out of his harness with the casual air of a man entering his office. He brushed a piece of dust from his sleeve and looked around, his cold eyes taking in the shelves. "Impressive," he said, his voice flat. "This is a restricted federal area. By order of national security, you are all being detained." His gaze locked onto Elena's camera. "Hand over all recording devices and materials, immediately." Gus took a half step in front of Elena. Elena, anticipating this, was already pulling the small SD card from her camera. Gus raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Look, we don't want any trouble." He suddenly pivoted, yelling, "Look out!" He lunged, not at the agents, but at a towering, rusty metal shelving unit nearby. With all his weight, he shoved it. The shelf groaned in protest, teetered for a heart-stopping second, and then fell away from them with a deafening, chaotic crash of metal on concrete. It sent up an enormous cloud of thick, choking dust, obscuring everything. "Now, Art," Gus roared. In that single, blinding moment of chaos, Elena lunged for Shadow. She shoved the tiny, precious SD card into the small, zippered pocket of the dog's SAR harness, a pocket designed for a GPS tracker now holding a legacy. Gus was already at the ropes, grabbing the escape ascender he had prepared. He slammed the clip onto Art's harness. "Go!" "Gus, I can't," Art yelled, grabbing for him. "He's the proof," Gus yelled back, pushing Art away and clipping the second line to Shadow's harness. "They can't get him. We'll hold him." As the agents burst through the settling dust, Gus and Elena raised their hands, standing their ground, a willing sacrifice. Gus hit the motorized pulley and the system engaged, pulling Art and Shadow rapidly up the shaft into the darkness. Art looked down one last time, seeing Markfield's furious, upturned face just before they were swallowed by the metal tube. They burst out into the misty gray dawn. Art unclipped them and ran, Shadow at his side. He ran with the skill of a ranger, moving like a ghost into the deep, wet forest. He did not stop for an hour. He finally collapsed in the shelter of a massive cedar, the rain beginning to fall. He was a fugitive. His friends were gone. Shadow pushed a wet nose into his hand. Art reached down, his trembling fingers closing around the small, hard square in the dog's harness. He had the proof, but he and his dog were now being hunted. A story like this reminds us that the deepest loyalty often has no voice. It is simply a steady, silent presence in the storm, just like Shadow's. Their fight for a forgotten truth has reached its end, but the memories they unearthed deserve to be remembered. If you believe in giving a voice to the forgotten, perhaps you could share this story with someone who understands. We would be honored if you joined our channel so we can continue this work together. Please let us know your reflections in the comments. We are ready for the next journey, and our newest story is waiting for you right on the screen.